Hey, good evening, everyone. This is State Representative Brad Halbrook with our Tuesday night weekly edition of the Illinois Freedom Caucus Roundtable and Town Hall. And tonight we're going to talk about education and funding and performance. And we've got a special guest with Ted Dabrowski of WirePoints. But before we bring Ted on, let's go to the Freedom Caucus Chairman, Chris Miller. Chris, welcome.
Well, good evening, Brad and Ted and all you other patriots. We are so glad that you chose to join us here this evening. You know, this is an extremely important topic of our time. We're losing a generation of children through indoctrination rather than teaching them to read, write, and do math. We're focusing on all the wrong things. It seems like the funding is way up, performance is way down. And it seems like all we want to do is lean on the shovel and pray for a hole. But we're gonna drill down into this topic this evening and bring you stats and information, and hopefully we can use this as one of the tools that we can lead the way to fix this educational problem. But anyway, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here this evening.
Chris. Let's go to Dan Calkins. Dan Calkins from Decatur. Representative Dan Calkins.
Thank you very much, Brad. Good evening, everyone. Good to be back with you on our Tuesday night roundtable. Very, very important topic tonight. And Ted, thank you for taking the time to be with us. We're facing a crisis in this state. We're falling behind. Our kids are falling behind. We're going to, our economy is falling behind because our kids aren't getting educated. And I know, Ted, you're going to have a lot of facts and figures. I mean, this isn't just some wild conjecture by the far right wing, but we're here to listen. We hope with your help tonight we can come up with some solutions. So, Brad, thanks for having me.
Excellent. And next member up is the new General Assemblyman Jed Davis from the 75th. Jed, welcome to tonight's event. And give our folks a welcome and tell us a little bit what's going on in your neighborhood before we get started.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Welcome, and thanks for tuning in and watching. Man, what an important topic. I'm actually a school board president of a private school, and as much as I love seeing our enrollment boom, it's really disheartening because it's a sign that there is distrust in our public school system, and that means it needs a lot of work. And it is the backbone of our local communities, man. I come from a small farm town where it is the pride and the spirit of the community. So we need to do everything we can to reinvigorate the education system and once again make these institutions a blessing to families instead of angst. So I'm greatly looking forward to tonight's conversation.
Okay, excellent, Jed. Thank you for joining us and being a part of this effort. So with that, we're going to bring on Ted Dabrowski of WirePoints. Ted's been with us in the past on some different occasions. Ted and his team has just got a ton of information. They write every day. They have a weekly or a daily email that goes out. Ted, you can probably talk a little bit more about that as we go on. But Ted, some of your stuff is and has been capturing the attention of national media, Wall Street Journal and others. And I'm sure you'll have information for that. So with that, Ted, the floor is all yours.
All right. Well, thank you, Brad. And thank you guys for having me on and let me share some information. So I'm going to pull up a file to share. But yeah, just before I do that, the stuff we've been putting up is getting national attention. We've recently reported on a whole bunch of schools in Illinois where not a single kid can do math at grade level. There's 53 of those, and another 30 schools where not a single kid can read at grade level. And so it's really sad, really pathetic, really dismal. And let me share with you some broader information than that. But of course, that's been hot on all the Fox News channels and throughout the country. But it's a much broader story than that. So let me share with you a file here. Let me make sure I do it right. Give me 1 second to find it. And I hope I'm doing it right. Brad, can you guys see that okay?
Can now. Go ahead.
All right. Well, so let me start with one fact, and this is the fact that it's really simple. It's 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to keep pushing this because it's a really easy way to understand how bad things are in Illinois. First of all, only at the whole entire state level in 2022, only 1 out of every 10 black students could read at grade level. 1 out of every 10. Statewide, only 2 of every 10 Hispanic kids could read at grade level. And statewide, with all races, all colors, all everything, 3 out of every 10 kids can read at grade level. And for whites, it's 4 out of every 10. So it's really easy to remember. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's really sad. It's really dismal, especially when you think about the minorities. 1 and 2 out of every 10. Now, within that, this is the problem I'm having with Illinois. And this is the problem I'm having with Governor Pritzker, with Lightfoot, and all of them, is that they're not telling the truth. They're covering up what's happening in Illinois. And here's probably the best cover-up. Just 9% of Black kids across the entire state, 1 out of 10 I mentioned, can read at grade level. And yet they graduated 80% of those kids. And for Hispanics, 16% of them can read at grade level, and 85% of them graduate. Now, it's not that I don't want to see them graduate. It's what we're doing to them is they're not prepared, and yet we pretend like everything's fine and we graduate them. That's the big problem I have with all of this. It's just not truthful. It's dishonest. Now, when we start talking about funding, and find out that we spend a ton of money in Illinois. But before I get there, I want to show that things have gotten worse with all these lockdowns, mask mandates, COVID vaccine, everything. Our results went from 36% of kids being able to read, or 6 out of every 100 being able to read at grade level in 2019. It went down 23% to 28 kids out of every 100, and then went down further in 2022. So we've gotten worse. Despite all this COVID money that's come in, despite all the bigger spending that we do, things get worse. And they can't tell you otherwise. Here's the big numbers. We spent $8.4 billion in 2019. This is just general fund spending. So there's more money that comes from other sources, but this is just the general fund. $8.4 billion. We've increased it to $9.3 billion. So a pretty big increase. And yet in that time period, the number of kids reading at grade level has gone from 37% to 30%. The number of students doing math at grade level has dropped as well. So things are not good. Now, I think the best way to look at where we are in Illinois is just to compare us to 2 states, Indiana and Florida. All right. Why? Indiana's our neighbor. They're a great comparison for us. That's a big part of our competition. But Florida is another big part of our competition, right? It's a state that's attracting all the people. Everybody's moving there. DeSantis is getting a lot of attention. So let's compare it to those. Well, look at this right off the bat. You see that we spend $6,000 and nearly $7,000 more dollars per student than those states. So Illinois is the 12th highest in the country. Indiana's 37th. Florida's 43rd. So you would expect that we would do far, far better than those 2 states in education. But when you look at it, 4th grade reading, Illinois is at 34%. Indiana's ahead. Florida's ahead. 4th grade math, 38% of our kids are proficient in reading. In Indiana's 47%, much higher, and Florida 48%. So both of those states, they spend far less than we do, and they're doing far better than we do. In 8th grade, Indiana's doing better in both reading and math than Illinois. Florida does a little worse, and worse in math. But you see that they're spending far less than we do, and they're either better than us or about the same as we are. So why are we spending $7,000 more per student than Florida? And it's not because, if you look at Florida, Florida actually has more low-income students, 55%, than Illinois does, 48%. It's got more minority students, 63%, than Illinois does. So they have a tougher situation when it comes to, if you want to measure it that way, low-income and minority students, and yet they spend a lot less, and they do about the same or better than we do. So this is a big problem. And in Illinois, you hear Pritzker and others saying, we want more money. And it's not about more money. You can see the results that we've had are dismal. Now, another reason why I'm against putting more money in is because in Illinois, over the last 12 years, from 2007 to 2019, no state has increased their per student spending more in the country than Illinois. We've increased our spending per student 70%. Remember those 2 states I just talked about, Indiana and Florida? They're at the bottom of the increases in the country, and they're still doing as well or better than we are. So it's not a money issue, it's a systemic issue, is how we spend our money, and whether we focus, as was said earlier, are we focusing on reading and math, or are we focusing on other things? This is that graphic I showed early. According to the US Census, we spent $16,600 in 2019. I'm doing a lot of pre-COVID stuff, by the way, so we don't get stuck in the whole COVID discussion. 16.6. Look at Indiana down here at 11.7, Florida at 9.5. These are numbers are a little bit different than the others because they're adjusted for cost of living. You can see how much more we spend than virtually the entire country. I'm going to skip these two. Now, an interesting slide that I have is, guess what? The number 1 and number 2 districts in the state of Illinois for reading are 2 cities, small cities, farm towns, by the way, Aviston and Bartelso. They're over there by Belleville somewhere. 85% of their kids are at reading proficiency in 2019, 84% for Bartelso. Look at their per student spend, $7,500, $7,300. Those are the lowest spends in the entire state. Compare that to my district where my kid goes, New Trier down here. New Trier spends 26% and has even a lower reading proficiency. So long discussion, happy to talk about it. Aviston and Bartelso, small farming towns, they don't have resources, and yet they have the highest reading results in the country, in the state. Why? Because the community, the parents, the school, everybody engages and they say, we're going to make do with what we have. We want our kids to read. We want our kids to do math. And that's what they do. And it's a fascinating story. Small town. It's not North Shore, not a bunch of rich people. It's a bunch of people who are focused on making sure their kids are prepared. Aviston and Bartel. So remember that we're going to keep featuring them. The big problem I'm having in Illinois is how we're hiding this stuff. And the Wall Street Journal wrote about our big report that we did back last year. And and they said it well. The land of Lincoln is failing its children and covering it up. And let me show you how they cover it up. So, and maybe some of you have seen some of these results, but here's, for example, this is across the entire state. In grade 3, only 11% of students in 2022 could read at grade level. In grade 4, it was just 12%. So the grade 3 students the previous year couldn't read, and now they can't read in grade 4. The grade 5 students are at 12%. They used to be grade 3 students 2 years ago. All they do is they promote the kids. If they can't read, who cares? Move them on to the next grade. And you can see how it happens. And this is how you destroy a whole generation of people's lives right here. We spent tons of money, billions of dollars. Kids can't read. Move them through the system so that by the time they get to 11th grade, only 9% of them can read at grade level. And celebrate that you've moved them through the system. And then pretend like just graduate them. Now the other part where they're covering things up is, look at this. This is Round Lake Elementary School. 4.1% of the kids can read at grade level. The State Board of Education calls that school commendable. That's the second best rating for a school. Commendable means deserving praise. How can any school or district or school where no kids can read be called commendable? This one in Rockford, just 2.5% of the kids can read at grade level. ISB, the State Board of Education, calls that school commendable. It's a lie. Same thing for this Aurora East school. 2% of kids can read at grade level, and yet they call it commendable. Just not truthful. There's 700 schools in Illinois where the majority, like I think less than 20% of kids can read at grade level, and yet they're called commendable. It's a sad statement. Here's the other big way they're hiding things. As we said, in the entire school, just 3 out of every 10 kids can read at grade level. And yet, 97% of all teachers throughout the state are rated excellent or proficient in reading. So almost all of them, everything's perfect, everything is fine, teachers are doing great, the system is good. Who cares if the kids can read or not? That's what they're saying. 362 out of the 850 school districts in Illinois rated their teachers 100% excellent or proficient. It's just not a truthful statement about the system. And of course, I mentioned the graduation rates. This is another way that parents can be confused. Well, my kid got promoted every year through the system, so they must have been doing well. They graduate, the teachers are good, the schools are commendable, everything's fine. Why aren't my kids successful? Well, here's why. So last slide I want to do is, there's a lot of people enriching themselves. These are Illinois' top pensioners when it comes to the teachers' retirement system. These are top superintendents. They come from all over the state. They retire in their 50s. These are the current annual pensions, $350,000, $330,000. They will turn out to be almost $10 million pensions by the time these people have lived their retirement. We have a messed up system. They want more money. The whole should be no more money. make our kids read, obsess about reading, get that reading for Black kids from 1 out of 10 to 5 out of 10, then 7 out of 10, then 10 out of 10. Same thing for Hispanics. Do what Aviston and Bartelso do. Focus on kids reading. If they can't read, they can't succeed. If they can read, they have a chance. And that's a summary of what I want to show. I've got much more information. I'll just close with this. Please look for our report at WirePoints. It's an indictment of the public education system, but there we show across the state what a mess it is. This is one of the key slides where we looked and we said, wait a minute, how can 0% of Mount Vernor's Black kids read at grade level? How can in Peoria only 8% of the Black kids read at grade level? It's a horrible story. It's one that I'm excited that people hear on this discussion, because we've got to turn this. I mean, it can be turned around, but it's not going to happen with the current model and Governor Pritzker's just dump more money in. It's got to be a whole realignment of the system where we focus on reading, math, and writing. Get back to the basics. So with that, I'm going to stop and just take any questions or share any comments.
Wow, Ted, those are staggering numbers.
Sad numbers.
Ted, when you have, these numbers, 3%, 5%, 12%, where does that come from?
Oh, that comes straight from the State Board of Education. It's from the Illinois report card. I'm only using their own data. So I don't make up any of this data. I don't do my own analysis. This comes, anybody has access to this if you know where to go get it. It's the State Board of Education on their website, Illinois report card. So we're only reporting the governor's stats, the governor's education board stats. He should be reporting these numbers. He should be, coming out and saying, "Oh my God, what's going on here?" And he should hold all his team accountable. Instead, he's out there promoting things are great, things are fine, our education is doing better. Record graduation rates. It's just very untruthful.
Yeah, Ted, 2 weeks ago in committee, in the Education Approach Committee, we had 6 superintendents before us spending nearly $19,000. And that was really one of the best school districts that still had 3/4 of their kids were not at grade level on math and reading. It's just stunning the amount of money that we're throwing at some of these things with the results.
Yeah, and parents just don't know it. This is part of the sad part, that parents don't know it. And most of them think their kids are doing well. They think that, Illinois schools are good. What's getting kind of funny is that now I'm looking at some school districts where 5 out of 10, right? So half of the kids can read at grade level. And we think that that's good now, right? That's good, 50%. We forget that 50% can't read at grade level. And that's the sad part. So we're getting a little lazy here. We're getting a little complacent, and everybody's buying the story. And the hard part is that we have either the highest or second highest property taxes in the country, and people are feeling it. But it's just not sustainable. That's why people leave.
I think one of the things that, we pride ourselves on these town halls, voice of truth, reason, and common sense. And I think that one of the things that people have a hard time getting there, one of the phenomenons that I know that is, at least even since I was in high school, was the grade inflation that's going on, where we don't really have a standard for AB, but we inflate. If 70% is the highest grade in the class, and they get an A and on down there, and so most of the work that's being done is given a grade that's higher than what it is deserving. So ultimately, what happens is the kids don't know the information, because I know a whole lot of kids that get into college, then they are having to take remedial English or remedial math because they're unprepared to face the rigors of a 4-year college institution, or even a 2-year. I know that that I've been involved in my degrees in education, and so I've coached and I've taught school, and I know that I substitute taught quite often before we got into this job, just because I had time to do it. And I know one of my favorite comments was, I was substituting a history class one day, and just as we were opening up the class, I asked the the students what they've been doing. And one of this girls, she chimed in and she said, well, the teacher's been pretending to teach and we've been pretending to learn. And of course, everybody got a good laugh out of that. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought this is probably a true statement. But I think that it's just a systemic problem that we live in a non-reality universe, and education is just a product of non-reality. And ultimately, it's a disservice to the kids, because when you have a true measurement and a true standard, we know where kids are on the pendulum. And so we need to get back to the basics of actually 90 to 100 being an A, and so on and so forth, where they're actually having a true reflection of what they know and how they're able to put that into practice.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ted brings up a great point with the governor should be addressing this. One of my early bosses way back in the day used to tell me, Jed, run to the problem. Like, run to the problem, because it's not going anywhere. And the more you ignore it, the larger it becomes. And I think everything you just showed is evident of that. And why in the world can't we have just an honest discussion here in Illinois and say, these are the numbers? We're horrible. Now, how do we improve them? Instead, we just like to hide and act like it's not happening.
Well, if I may comment on that, I mean, the big issue is that there's too many people who are enriching themselves, right? To actually address the problem, we'd have to break a lot of things. There'd be a lot of what do you want to call it, heads on the table, people getting fired, right? Things have to change dramatically. But there's too many people who have who feeding from the trough, if I say it that way. Too many people are enriching themselves. Yeah. You've got the most units of government in Illinois. You've got 850 school districts. Think of all those superintendents. Think of all those supporters of the superintendent. There's just so many people that are part of this $40 billion that are spent on education between local property taxes and the state level and the federal level. Too many people, and nobody wants to upset the apple cart. And that's the sad part. But every superintendent should be screaming from the top of the building, saying, "Look at these results; they're horrible. We got to do better." The governor should be doing it. Lightfoot should be doing it. You guys are at least holding a meeting, which is fantastic. But nobody else is willing to talk about these things. We have to raise it as far as we can until we have to scream loud enough until we get heard.
Yeah. So Ted, this new evidence-based funding formula that was passed and signed into law 5-6 years ago, 27 different metrics that goes into this formula, but there's very little, if any, accountability on the outcomes. It's all about the inputs. I don't know. That's kind of an interesting concept of how you can come back to Springfield. It's already built into the formula, $300 million worth of new money every year. This year, they're asking for $500 million more.
Yeah, it's fascinating. But when they passed that, Brad, we warned. It was, to me, it's the worst. Until Amendment 1, it was the worst bill that Illinois has ever passed. One, because it's so complex, you can't figure it out. It's all these inputs, money going in. There's all these formulas. It used to be, I used to know this funding formula for education perfectly. Now it's so complicated with so many sheets, you can't tell what's going on. And it's we haven't talked about it, but part of this is all about the union powers, the teacher union powers. They dominate. They got this formula passed. Nobody understands it. It's all about inputs, how much money we put in. But again, like we're saying, nobody cares about the outputs. 1 out of 10 Black kids can read at grade level. Why isn't anybody talking about the outputs? That's the big issue, and it's the big lie between the inputs and the outputs. And the unions need to be called out. Pritzker needs to be called out. Rounder needs to be called out. Everybody who was before that needs to be called out, because these results are horrendous.
Right. Well, we keep driving the question: how much money does it take to educate kids properly? My question to a lot of folks is: this fair to the students? These scores, is this fair to students? Is this fair to families and parents? Is this fair to future employers? Is this fair to the taxpayers to have these kind of outcomes?
Well, and bring it back to Florida and Indiana, right? They spend so much less. The property taxes are lower, all that stuff, and yet the results are a little bit better. They're not something to scream about. But if we're going to spend this much more, then show me the outcome. Otherwise, why are we spending more?
Right. Exactly.
And that Aviston and Bartelso to me was the amazing discovery when we looked at the list and lined them all up. How was it that it's the two school districts that are spending less than $8,000 a student? How is it that they have the highest scores? And I'll tell you what it is. It's focus on reading, family values, a lot of family values. There's a lot of discussion on faith down there. So it's a religious town. It's a farming town. It's a blue collar town. But they all engage and rally around it. So it can be done. And it can be done with the good old family faith and focus on reading and writing and math. It can be done.
Yeah,
The proof.
Jed, as we get close to the end, any closing thoughts or questions before we close out here this evening?
No, I mean, to piggyback off Ted, I think the way I've always looked at the school that I'm a board member at is that we're a partner with the home. We're here to partner with the home. And I think when we truly do that, we see kids thrive. But man, when you start to become the home and the school is the institution, it's backwards. And we need to make sure that priority is right.
Yeah, exactly. Chris, any closing thoughts?
No, I think that this is a extremely probably one of the most important topics of our time, and it's extremely important that we roll up our sleeves, we face reality, we tell the truth on all these issues, and have an understanding that money's not going to fix this problem. But I do think that if we could take a step forward where educational dollars follow the student, I think just from the mere the supply of the product that is being produced, if there's competition in the marketplace for educational dollars, I think the outcome is that we're going to have a better product at the end of the day. But as long as we continue with the status quo, kicking the can down the road, pretending like this problem doesn't really exist, and just trying to throw more money at it, it's proven over time that that's never going to fix this problem. And so we need to work together and get it done.
Right, exactly. Ted, we're all appreciative of you coming on this evening and sharing truth, logic, and common sense with us. This is going to be about a $10 billion item out of a $50 billion budget this year. Is that correct? And then closing thoughts, Ted, anything that you might have to say before we close out this evening?
Yeah, that 10 billion out of the 50 billion, but let's not forget the property taxes are the bigger thing for funding education. So it's a much bigger number and a much bigger pain for the people who have to pay for this, whether you have kids in school or not. So two thoughts, Chris nails it, why we need more competition. We need school choice. We need education savings accounts. Iowa just did it. Arizona just did one of the biggest programs ever. These education savings accounts are going to change how education is done. We're going to have to wait a bit in Illinois, but that's where we should be going towards, giving powers the parent to choose the best school for their children. And then the last comment is, we've got to keep talking about the power of these unions. More money will actually make things worse because it just becomes a heavier, fatter system that will never be able to change. So we need to stop this whole thing of more money and really get back our focus on teaching the kids to read and write. So thank you guys for raising this issue and for allowing us to raise the issue.
Well, this won't be the last time we talk about this matter. The education funding debate continues. And so, I think we all agree that money needs to follow the student, not the system. All right. With that, guys, we're going to say goodnight, and we'll talk to you real soon.